Welcome back to United Taste of America. I'm Rick K. Jones, the host for this series, which is really all about American history and the history of cuisine in this, our 250th birthday of America in this year. So it's been a fun series. Today we're in Minnesota, or as some like to say, Minnesota. Minnesota is, like so many of the upper Midwestern states, was heavily Native American country, originally explored by the French. We've talked about how the French, all in the northern part of the United States, were there to do what? Trade for furs. Now, why would you trade a beaver fur for a little glass bracelet? Because you'd never seen a glass bracelet, and you could find plenty of beaver furs. Remember, in this era, all kinds of furs were so popular in Europe. People were getting wealthy on shipping furs back, deer skins, buffalo skins, beaver skins, all these types of things. And Minnesota was a hotbed. And why? So many lakes. So many lakes created so many opportunities for what? Beaver. And beaver was one of the pelts that was coveted in Europe. And so the French began to trap or trade with the Native Americans. And the French got along with the Native Americans. They were not there to steal their land. They were not there to homestead, to farm. They really made friends with the Native Americans in so many ways. And many of them married Native American women and had families. And so that area was, heavily influenced by the French. And if you go to Minnesota, there's a lot of French names of rivers and areas up there. Half of Minnesota became part of the United States with the Treaty of Paris after the Revolutionary War, and then the other half fell in line in the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. The first major fort built there was Fort Snelling. It was built on the river. It was there, again, to service the fur industry. Fort Snelling became very famous because a slave man came there. An escaped slave came to a free state, a free area, a free territory. His name was Dred Scott. It's a very famous case in the Supreme Court, the Dred Scott case, where unfortunately he was said, no, you got to go back. You're somebody's property, and was one of the landmark decisions that ultimately led to the ultimate conflict. The American Civil War was part of the Dred Scott legacy. Fort Snelling also led to the development of what we call the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, right across the river from each other, kind of grew at the same time. There was a falls. The river had a falls, and that falls was able to create power. And originally that power was for a lumber yard. Okay, so it was a place for the, a sawmill, for the timber industry. And timber was a huge crop as they're cutting timber throughout Minnesota. Again, beavers made a lot of dams with the timber. We cut a lot of timber down to build, all sorts of things across the country. And so they were shipping lots and lots of timber from Minnesota. But later, at that falls area, they started creating these industrial plants to process grains, flour. This is the home of Pillsbury. This is the home of General Mills. And so the trains would bring the grains from other Midwestern states directly to Minneapolis, St. Paul. And there were these huge grain processing flour mills, essentially, in that area. Then we reached a treaty with the Native Americans in 1851, and then the state exploded with largely immigrants from Europe, and most of them from Scandinavia. So this is the home of Swedes and Norwegians and Finns and Danes. Lots and lots of Scandinavians came during that period of time. And so many came that by 1858, Minnesota became the 32nd state in the Union. What is it known for? Still farming, still lumber, lots of logging still going on, lots of mining, 3M, Minnesota Mining in minerals, 3M company based there. The flour mills still exist there. Again, we mentioned two, Pillsbury and General Mills. The famous hospital, the Mayo Clinic, originated in Minnesota. And so it's famous for a lot of things, a lot of diversity there. And our musical playlist has some really diverse songs today, largely from artists from Minnesota. Minnesota has so many diverse musical artists. Let's start with one of the most famous, Prince from Minneapolis, and his famous song, 1999. Dylan, Robert Zimmerman, Bob Dylan was born and raised in Minnesota. We've got a classic song today. It's a duet between Johnny Cash and Bob Dylan called The Girl from the North Country. The Andrews Sisters, famous for World War II. We have a song from that era called The Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. The rocker Eddie Cochran recorded a classic summer song called The Summertime Blues. He was from Minnesota. And finally, one of the Gump sisters, the famous Judy Garland, is from Minnesota. We have a song called The Man That Got Away. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that song. That song came out in 1954. I was born in 54. They remade a movie called A Star is Born. Later, they made two more versions of A Star is Born. There was a Barbra Streisand version and a later version with Lady Gaga. But in this case, Judy Garland was the star. And the famous Harold Arlen wrote this song, The Man That Got Away, with lyrics by Ira Gershwin. And Harold Arlen had written two very much signature songs for Judy Garland. He wrote a song that became her standard called Get Happy. And he also wrote Somewhere Over the Rainbow. We'll be talking about that at Estate a little bit later. The culinary really traditions of Minnesota reflect those various ethnic groups that have come there and the natural resources that are prevalent throughout the state. Let's start with the natural wonders. They grow wild rice in Minnesota. It's not really a rice at all. It's a different kind of grain, not even in the rice family, but it looks like rice. And it's kind of a brown husk rice that you get by boat because it grows in the water, and you harvest it there. And from that wild rice, they make their very famous wild rice soup. They grow a lot of blueberries there. And so you want to get great blueberry muffins, go to Minnesota. They grow Honey Crisp apples. And they make a lot of dishes from those apples up there. And they have a lot of freshwater fish, including the walleye, and that leads to the very famous Friday night fish fries. And again, a lot of that came from the Catholic culture and other cultures that didn't eat meat on Friday, and so they ate a lot of fish on Friday. Austin, Minnesota is the home of Hormel. It's famous for ham, or maybe even more famous for Spam, which is spiced ham. I think their ad today calls it sizzled pork and I love that, Spam, in Austin, Minnesota. They invented a type of hamburger in Minnesota called the Juicy Lucy. The Juicy Lucy has the cheese of the burger inside the beef. And so when you're wrapping the beef up, inside is traditionally American cheese. Wonderful, gooey American cheese that when you put it on the flat top, it begins to ooze out. It's the Juicy Lucy. They invented the bunt cake, dessert bars, Jell-O salad, and a dish called the potitza, which is a Slavian rolled sweet bread with nuts, honey, and spices. It's a roll bread that you slice, and it's a classic dessert. But it's really the Scandinavian culture that produces some of its most iconic dishes. These include lefses, the potato and flour flatbreads, either savory or sweet. We're going to feature them as our featured dish from the state of North Dakota a little bit later. They do a lot of lefses in Minnesota. They also do lutefisk, which is dried cod with lye. And they're famous for their hot dishes, lots and lots of casseroles, usually today made with tater tots. And we're going to talk about tater tots next week when we talk about Oregon. But one dish says Scandinavia probably more than any other dish, and that are the classic Swedish meatballs. And so we went to the American Swedish Institute there in Minneapolis to sample these wonderful Swedish meatballs. At this, it's really it's a home that was built by a Swedish industrialist for his family that is a magnificent architectural gem. And connected to it is a Swedish museum, okay, Swedish-American museum. And connected to that is a kitchen, is a restaurant called the Fika Cafe, and it's a Nordish-influenced menu. The Turnblad Mansion sits right there, and so it's really kind of a neat juxtaposition. On a sunny day, you can take your dishes and go outside and eat on tables kind of in the courtyard. And again, beautiful fall day or beautiful summer day in Minnesota. It's really a great place to eat. The menu is seasonal based on what's fresh, what's growing. New Nordic cuisine. It's led by executive chef Amelia Obermeyer Smith and her team. I had a wonderful day with her. She's very interesting. Her mother was German. Her father was a combination African-American, Native American. And she's working in a Swedish restaurant or a Nordic restaurant. Phenomenal chef, made us some unbelievable dishes, including the classic Swedish meatballs that she made. All right, how do you make them? You're going to take a combination of ground beef and ground pork together. Put them in a bowl. Going to put some breadcrumbs, fresh-made breadcrumbs. Put an egg in there to bind it all together. Put a little allspice, a little bit of nutmeg. Going to roll them up in these balls, and then you're going to pan fry them, and usually pan fry them in a gravy that's made with the beef drippings, beef broth, and sour cream to make a gravy. You're going to cook them all together in there. And then how are you going to serve them? Maybe on some buttered noodles or traditionally on mashed potatoes. And they're going to have some berries on the side and a little bit of salad. And it's just one of those classic American dishes that really came from Sweden. So where else should you eat in Minnesota? We talked about those wonderful blueberries. Well, there's this teeny, and I mean teeny little hole-in-the-wall breakfast place in Minneapolis called Al's Breakfast. 10 seats. That's it. 10. A counter. 10 seats. They make, y'all, the best blueberry pancakes I've ever had in my life. There's always a line. There are only 10 seats, but it goes pretty fast. You got to go to Al's in Minneapolis and get their famous blueberry pancakes. Then we talked a little bit about what? The Juicy Lucy. The Juicy Lucy supposedly was invented in South Minneapolis at a bar called Matt's Bar, and that's where I had mine. And it's the real deal, y'all. I'm telling you, the juices run down. Ooey gooey. They got to be smart. You can't, when you get it, when it's served to you, don't bite into it first because that cheese is so hot, it'll burn your mouth. So you gotta have a couple of beers and maybe eat your pickle and all that stuff. But then that Juicy Lucy is amazing. And it's interesting. I've never found a Juicy Lucy outside of Minnesota. I can't think of another restaurant. Lots of places in Minnesota that serve it. But Matt's Bar is where I've had mine, and it's supposedly the place where it originated. And then we talked about wild rice and wild rice soup. The great place to eat wild rice is in the French Meadow Bakery and Cafe in St. Paul, across the river. St. Paul is where the University of Minnesota is. This place does an amazing wild rice soup, diced chicken, wild rice, fresh vegetables, cream, served with sourdough bread. You know, those cold Minnesota nights, that's what you want. You want some warm, wonderful rice soup. Minnesota's famous for outdoor sports, lots of hunting, lots of fishing, lots of skiing, lots of cross-country skiing, lots of ice skating, very active people, lots of bicycling. When it's cold, those cold states, when you have those beautiful days, people come out in record numbers. We mentioned the number of lakes, and there are great places to eat throughout the state of Minnesota along the lakefronts there. So put Minnesota on your bucket list. That's our wrap today on Minnesota and those amazing Swedish meatballs from the Fika Cafe at the American Swedish Institute in Minneapolis. We're going to see you back here next week on United Taste of America as we head to state number 33. We're taking the Oregon Trail to Oregon.